Hi everyone, welcome along. Now, for this session, we're going to attempt to rescue a wildlife picture. So this is an image that Becky sent me, where she's managed to capture this partridge, but really and truly she's got the wrong depth of field on this image, in that the background is very complicated and is too sharp and is very distracting from the bird. There's also a lot of foreground, etc. So if this was taken with the right lens under ideal circumstances, then the front of this foreground would be a little bit more blurred than it actually is. The background would be completely blurred out, so you couldn't tell what it was. And so the bird would stand sharp against it. Now, we can use Photoshop to correct this. You can't do a perfect job, but you can do a halfway decent job with a few simple techniques. So we'll just rename these layers. So we'll make that the original. I like to name my layers, otherwise I get an awful muddle. We'll make one duplicate, which will be the subject. We'll make another duplicate, which will be the foreground. And another duplicate, which will be the background. So the idea is to break this picture up into the parts that I want to adjust separately. So the foreground is going to be all this light coloured stuff in the front of the picture. We're going to control how that blur works. The background is all the mush at the back, and the subject is obviously the bird in the middle. So let's select the subject layer and see if we can isolate the subject. Now, fortunately, that's easy to do with the latest version of Photoshop, because you go to the Object Selection tool, and for this sort of subject it does remarkably well. You just click on it and you see you've got the marching ants. It's made its selection. So if we now press the mask button down here at the bottom of the layers panel, we get a layer mask applied. So if we turn off the other layers now, we can see what's been selected, and that's what it's done. Now, for a start off, that's not a bad selection. When you look at it, all these other areas that pop up are things that it partly included that we don't really want it to include. So we could just paint over those. So the way a mask works is anything that's white on the mask shows through, and anything that's black doesn't show through. So we can get rid of that mush around the outside by just painting black around the outside. So if we get a paintbrush, and here with the foreground and background colours, you type X to reverse those, so make it black. So we've got our paintbrush up here, and we can make it as big as we like, and we can just paint over all this, just to make sure that the areas that we don't want selected are not going to interfere with our picture. So there we go. So that should be all nice and clean now. Now, what we can also do, we can go in and take a close look at our selection. And this one's actually, the selection here is good enough for this particular application. It's not perfect by any means, but it's good enough. But if you wanted to tidy this selection up, I'm pressing the Alt key and using the mouse wheel to scroll in and out. And I'm using the space bar held and a left click on the mouse to drag the image around. I just find that's a very simple way of working to zoom around when you're working on an image. And when you're doing these sorts of adjustments, do zoom in nice and close so you can see in detail what you're doing. So if we wanted to see how well this edge is selected, what we could do is paint on the mask to reveal more so that we see how well it's selected. So if we type X, we reverse the colour, so we're now painting in white. So if I just paint on there, you can see where the edge of the bird is. So you could say, well, actually, it's not a bad selection at all. So if you press X again to reverse the colours, reduce the brush size using the square brackets, left and right square brackets. And then if you paint white, we can undo that bit of selection. Like so. I'm just dragging with the mouse to do this. So we could go around doing that, and sometimes you'll need to do a lot of that sort of work, and other times, like this one, is actually good enough because we're not going to have great light differences between the images. All we're going to do is change the focus slightly between them. So let's just tidy that bit up. So we don't actually need a brilliant selection for doing this sort of recovery job that we're talking about now. So there we go, that's the subject done. We don't need to do any more with the subject. So if we now move on to the foreground layer, we pick that and turn it on. Zoom right out so you can see all of it. So now we want to just do something to this front layer. So the first thing we want to do is select it. The easiest way to select it is to use the quick selection tool. Now this selects on colour and tone, so wherever you click it will select everything that's a similar colour. So you can see as I start dragging the brush along here, and I've clicked it as well, we can very soon select all that foreground, and that's good enough. So we've got that edge selected. It's done quite a good job on that edge. We can go in and have a close look, but it's done a pretty good job on that edge. It's got some of the spikes and all the rest of it, so that's absolutely fine. So what we now want to do is have a mask that isolates this. So if we just press the mask button now, we get another mask, and that's our foreground. If I turn off the subject as well, that's what we've got in the foreground. So now we want to apply a bit more blur to this. It's got some blur on it, but we want to put some more blur on it. And before we do that, we're going to make it a smart layer, a smart object, beg your pardon. Because by making it a smart object, we can keep coming back to it and altering it. So if our first adjustment isn't right, we can try again. So now we go up to Filters, Blur Gallery, and choose Tilt Shift Filter. Now this is a wonderful filter for this because it puts a gradual blur. So this is the control panel for it. If you look, you'll see that the bottom of it is the most blurred, and the top is blurred, and the center is the subject, is the sharp bit. So the idea is you can create a normal lens effect by placing the center on the subject. So if we do that here, place it where the subject was, which was right there, then you'll find we've got a sharp band running across here, and this foreground will be blurred. Now we can alter how fast that blurs up or how slowly that blurs up by dragging this line at the bottom. It's only a little faint dotted line. You'll probably have a job to see it on the screen, but we can move that up and down. So I would think if we stop there, then that gives us a fairly narrow in sharp band, which is the sort of thing you'd get if you're using a long focal length lens with a wide aperture. So that's probably about right for that. So all we need to do now is click OK. That's fine, we've done that. So you'll see on that layer now we've got 3 sub layers, which is what the Smart Filters has put in. So we can now, if we want to alter it, we can just click on that blur gallery at the bottom, and we can go back and change the amount of blur on that level. So that's the foreground done. So now we want to look at the background. And have I got, yeah, so the background at the moment is everything. There isn't anything selected on it, and we don't need to bother to select anything on it, but we will make it a smart object because we're going to cover up the bits of the background that we want to keep. So we'll go up here to the filter gallery, blur gallery, tilt shift, and we're going to move this way down here now, and this little dial in the middle here controls how much blur there is. So we're going to give it a lot of blur. So we want the background to be very blurred out, which is what you would get with a decent focal length lens, a long focal length lens, sorry, with a very wide aperture. So that looks okay for the background. So we hit OK, and that will do our layer. So at this point, we've actually done all the main things we need to do to create the effect. So we've got the real background completely blurred out. We've got the foreground with a bit of added blur here, and we've got the subject. Now the problem is they're all in the wrong order at the moment. So if we get the foreground layer and drag it so it's above the background layer, that gets us our foreground in. So we've got this band of sharpness across the foreground. And then if we go and grab our subject and put the little bird up at the top, not quite there yet, and turn it on, we get the subject there. So now we've got the subject nicely highlighted against the background. You could probably do a bit better on this background. It probably wants a little bit of softening on that edge to make it look really good, and that dark bit is showing up down there now. So what we could do, if we select that mask, we can now see the areas that are causing a problem. So we can go back to our brush, and if we want to stop that showing, you can go right in really close. Oh, I've just got the wrong, I haven't got the brush, Control Z. It's the paintbrush I want. And I can stop that dark line. I can just go in there to get rid of that dark line, which is where we've got a bit of the background showing through that we didn't want. You can go as far as you like with this sort of thing. Yeah, there's a bit more down there that needs to go. So this is me holding and clicking and dragging the mouse to get this. So that's tidied up that bit of the selection. And I think round the head could do with a little bit of work as well, just to get it to look nice. But it's all it's a little bit painstaking now, but I mean, you would expect that if you're trying to recover an image like this. It's not going to be absolutely simple job. So you can do as good or as quick a job as you like at this point. You can spend hours fiddling about to get it absolutely perfect and no one know the difference, or you can take what's a reasonably good job and go from there. Get rid of that. Okay. So that's not a bad job really of creating this impression of having taken it with a long focal length lens. So what I would do at this point, we can go back and make changes to all of these. We can go back to the blur gallery and change the foreground and the background blur if we think we've overdone it a bit. But this bird's got a dead eye, so there's no highlight in the eye at the moment, not that you can see. And I think the image needs cropping, and there's a few other things we could do with it. So what I would do here is take a stamp, and a stamp is creating a new layer which is a copy of everything below. So if you press Shift, Control, Alt and E, you will see I've got a new layer there. I can turn off all the ones below. That's it. If I turn off the bottom one, we can do a before and after. So if I now do that, so this is what we've done. The foreground blur has not changed a great deal, but we put all the black background blur in. Okay, so anyway, that allows us to do a before and after comparison. So now what we could do with is brightening up that eye, because it's not very good as it is. So we can go in there, See, there is a bit of a highlight in the eye. There often is, but it's not very good. So if we go in and get the polygonal lasso as good as anything as far as these tools go for selecting, you could use a ellipse tool to get the eye, because that might be more accurate, but this will do. So we just go around this and select this. There we go, and we are going to make an adjustment layer. So the circle that's half white, half black, click on that and choose levels. I tend to do it with levels, but you can do it with other things as well. So we can brighten up that eye. If we bring the white slider down, it's all gone a bit too daft at the moment, but we can just moderate that. So I want to get the actual catch light to go as light as possible without the eye glowing like red eyes. So maybe something like that. So if we then, it's probably as well to zoom out at this point, and yeah, so we've now got a catch light in the eye. So you can turn that on and off. It just adds a little bit to the picture having that in there. And if it was mine, I'd want to crop this, so I'd probably bring it in something like this. I don't know. That would do. Anything you do to the picture now takes a bit longer because it has to render the smart filters every time to the new image. So here we go. It will finish doing that, hopefully without crashing the computer. And there we go. There's our finished shot. So I won't say it's perfect, but that's a method you can use to rescue a wildlife picture where you want to achieve the effect of having taken it with a long focal length lens and a small aperture. So that's it. Thank you very much, folks.